Picture this. You're in a meeting. The word you need is right there, right on the edge of your tongue. You know it, and it just won't surface. So you stumble through and move on. But inside, there's a flash of panic because for a lot of professionals over 40, that moment is becoming more and more familiar. The word retrieval delay, the lost train of thought mid-sentence, that 2 p.m. fog where you're staring at a screen and nothing is registering. Here's what you need to know. On March 11th of this year, Stanford University published a study in Nature, the most prestigious scientific journal on the planet, and they proved that a specific bacteria in your gut are proliferating as you age and directly impairing your brain's ability to form and retrieve memories. This is not a situation of it may be linked to. It could potentially contribute to. This is proven in a controlled study published in Nature. And the part that should concern you is that no one in your doctor's office is going to mention this to you because the system they work inside has no billing code for it, no protocol for it, no 8-minute workflow that accounts for the fact that the reason behind the afternoon brain fog might start 3 feet south of your skull. That's what we're covering today, the mechanism, the markers, and what you can actually do about it before this costs you something you can't get back. If you've been told that brain fog is just stress, just aging, or just part of getting older, I hear you. I hear that every single week from people who sit across from me. High-performing professionals, CEOs, VPs, business owners, people who solve complex problems for a living and can't understand why their own brain is betraying them at 43 or 52 or 61. And the reason they can't understand it is because nobody's explained the mechanism. They get platitudes like get more sleep, reduce stress, maybe try meditation. Meanwhile, their cognitive bandwidth is shrinking and their career's on the line. So let me explain what Stanford actually found because the mechanism matters. When you understand the mechanism, you stop guessing and you start solving. Here's the sequence. As you age, certain bacteria in your gut, and Stanford specifically identified one called Parabacteroides goldsteinii. Interesting name, right? These bacteria proliferate, they multiply, they take up more real estate in your intestinal environment. And as they grow, they produce medium chain fatty acids as a metabolic byproduct. Now, medium chain fatty acids are not inherently bad, but in this context, at these concentrations, they trigger an inflammatory immune response in the myeloid cells that line your gut wall. Think of your gut lining as a security perimeter. When those immune cells activate, they don't just sound the alarm locally. They send signals up the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in your body, and it's the communication highway between your gut and your brain. It runs from your intestinal tract all the way up to your brain stem, and when that nerve is carrying inflammatory signals instead of healthy signals, the destination that takes the hit is your hippocampus, the brain's memory and learning center. That's the pipeline. Bacterial overgrowth in the gut, inflammatory fatty acid production, immune activation in the gut wall, and a compromised vagus nerve signaling, which leads to impaired hippocampal function. And here's what makes this critical for anyone over 40. This isn't a sudden event. It's a slow accumulation. This has been building in your body for years, and nobody measured it because nobody was looking. Let me walk you through what this actually means in your daily life because the science is one thing, living it is another. Your hippocampus is responsible for consolidating short-term memory into long-term memory. It's the reason you can remember your CFO's name, recall the details of the contract you read yesterday, and hold the thread of a complex negotiation without losing your place. When hippocampal function is impaired, even slightly, what shows up first is not dramatic memory loss. It's not Alzheimer's. It's subtler than that. And that's what makes it dangerous for high performers. What shows up first is word retrieval delay. You know the word, but it takes you an extra 2 seconds to surface. Then it's train of thought fragmentation. You're in the middle of making an appointment, a meeting, and suddenly you've lost where you were going. Then it's decision fatigue that arrives earlier and earlier in the day. By 2 p.m., your brain feels like it's running on dial-up. Now, if you went to your doctor right now and said, I'm having trouble with focus and memory, here's what would happen. They'd tell you it's just part of getting older. If you push back, they'd run a basic metabolic panel, maybe a CBC. They'd check your thyroid, but probably not a full thyroid panel. They'd look at the numbers, and if everything falls inside the reference range, they'd tell you you're fine. Maybe suggest you sleep more. Maybe offer an antidepressant. And here's the problem. Those reference ranges are built from a population average. They tell you whether you're sick enough to diagnose. They do not tell you whether your brain is operating at 60% of its capacity, because bacteria in your gut are compromising the nerve that feeds the hippocampus. That's the space between normal and optimal. And that space is where high performers lose their edge. Quietly, gradually, and without anyone sounding the alarm. Now let me get specific about the vagus nerve, because it's the one piece that connects everything. Your vagus nerve handles roughly 80% of the communication between your gut and your brain. 80%. It's not a minor pathway, it's the primary communication infrastructure. When your gut environment is healthy, when you have the right bacterial balance, low inflammation, and intact gut lining, the signals traveling up the nerve support cognitive function, emotional regulation, and stress resilience. Your brain gets clean data. It operates with clarity. When your gut environment is compromised, meaning bacterial overgrowth, chronic low-grade inflammation, damaged intestinal lining, the signals change. Instead of clean data, your brain is receiving noise, inflammatory signals, distress signals, and your hippocampus, which depends on clean vagal input to consolidate memories and support executive function, starts underperforming. Stanford proved that when they treated older mice with vagus nerve activators, compounds that restored healthy signaling along that nerve. The mice, their cognitive performance returned to match the young animals. Let me say that again. Old mice with impaired cognition performed like young mice once the vagus nerve signaling was restored. The hardware wasn't damaged. The communication line was compromised. Fix the line, fix the function. I want to tell you about a client of mine named Don. Don was 62 years old when he came to us. He'd been dealing with chronic GERD, an acronym that stands for gastroesophageal reflux disease. He'd been dealing with it for over 30 years. 30 years on proton pump inhibitors, Prilosec, every single day for 3 decades. And here's what nobody told Don in those 30 years. PPIs don't just suppress acid. They interfere with proper digestion and nutrient absorption. His body was slowly being starved of the building blocks it needed to function, including the nutrients his brain required for cognitive performance. But the GERD was only the presenting symptom. When Don came to us, he was also managing high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, sleep apnea, allergies, tinnitus, joint inflammation, poor sleep, and low energy. Each one was being treated separately by a different specialist. Nobody was connecting all the dots. And here's the detail that connects Don's story to the Stanford research. Don told me his mental clarity was slipping. He felt less sharp, less articulate. He was worried that his declining cognitive performance was going to cost him his executive position at the trucking company where he worked. He was afraid he'd never be able to fully transition into his own business because his brain wasn't keeping up. Now think about that through the lens of what Stanford just proved. 30 years of gut damage, 30 years of bacterial imbalance, 30 years of a compromised gut environment sending inflammatory signals up the vagus nerve to his brain. Don's cognitive decline wasn't aging. It wasn't genetics. It was a gut problem masquerading as a brain problem. And the conventional system, which had been treating him for 3 decades, never once looked at the connection. What did we do? We tested. We didn't guess. We ran a comprehensive biomarker analysis, not the 10 to 15 markers his doctor was running. We looked at bacterial balance, inflammation markers, digestive function, nutrient status, and toxic burden. Within the first week, Don made a decision he hadn't been able to make in 30 years. He and his doctor agreed to try discontinuing his PPIs. He never made it past 3 days before. Within 2 months, he reported that reflux that had defined his daily life for 30 years was no longer present. He reported significant weight changes. His joint inflammation improved to the point where he could wear his rings again for the first time in 5 years. He told me his mental clarity felt different, that he felt articulate and sharp in a way that he hadn't in years. And here's the part that connects directly to what Stanford is telling us. When we addressed Don's gut environment, when we worked on bacterial balance and reduced the inflammatory load, he reported that his cognitive function improved. Not because we gave him a brain supplement, because we addressed the communication line between his gut and his brain. Now bring this back to the Stanford study. Don's story is a gut story on the surface. GERD, acid reflux, nutrient depletion. But what happens when your body can't absorb B12 for 30 years? What happens when systemic inflammation goes unchecked for 3 decades? Cognitive decline, brain fog, memory lapses, the very things Stanford just proved are caused by gut-driven vagal nerve impairment. Don's brain wasn't failing him. His gut was failing his brain. And nobody was looking at the connection because the system doesn't connect those dots. The GI doctor treats the gut, the neurologist treats the brain. Nobody audits the communication pathway in between. Let me give you another angle on this. We had a client named Elizabetta, whose primary care physician attributed everything she was experiencing to anxiety. Brain fog, digestive issues, palpitations, all anxiety, they said. They even prescribed schizophrenia medication as an anxiety treatment. Nothing improved. 4 months into working with us, after we actually looked at what was happening in her gut and addressed the root cause, by working with her medical team, Elizabetta was able to evaluate each of her medications based on what the data was showing. In her case, the changes were significant. What the data suggested was that many of her symptoms had a gut component that had never been investigated. And the signals traveling up her vagus nerve were creating symptoms that looked like anxiety, looked like a mental health crisis, but were actually an expression of gut dysfunction. This is what Stanford's research is confirming at the cellular level. The gut-brain axis is not a metaphor. It's not a trend. It's a measurable, provable, biological pathway. And when the brain, when the bacteria in your gut are producing inflammatory byproducts that compromise the vagal signaling, the symptoms show up in your brain as fog, as memory loss, as anxiety, as cognitive decline. And if no one tests the gut and everyone treats the brain, obviously nothing changes. Now, here's where I have to be transparent with you. Because I respect your intelligence too much to leave you with half the picture, everything I just explained, the mechanism, the bacterial pathway, the vagus nerve connection, you now understand conceptually. And that understanding is valuable. It changes how you think about what's happening inside your body. It stops you from accepting it's just stress or you're just getting older as final answers. But understanding the concept and knowing your numbers are two very different things. You can understand that Parabacteroides goldsteinii proliferates with age and compromises the vagus nerve, but you don't know what's proliferating in your gut right now. You don't know what your inflammation markers look like. You don't know whether your vagus nerve, the signaling has been compromised. You don't know which specific bacteria are out of balance, which inflammatory pathways are active, or how far down this road your body has already traveled. And that gap between understanding the mechanism and having your own personal data is what keeps you from getting results. It's why people bounce from podcast to podcast, supplement to supplement, protocol to protocol. They're trying to fix a complex, interconnected system without a map. And without a map, even the smartest person in the room is guessing. I had a client named Monica who was a massage therapist with extensive health knowledge. She spent years managing allergies, fatigue, brain fog, chemical sensitivities through diet, nutrition, exercise, and holistic care. She was more health literate than most people who walk through our door. And she still couldn't solve her own problem because she didn't have the data. When we ran comprehensive testing, including one of the most thorough toxin panels available and a specialized nasal culture, we found mold, heavy metals, and pesticides that explained every symptom she'd been chasing for years. She reported dramatic improvement in her allergy symptoms within the first week. She told us the brain fog and low energy that had defined her daily experience started shifting in ways that she hadn't expected. Monica knew more about health than most practitioners, but knowledge without your specific data is just a more educated version of guessing. And guessing has a cost. It costs you time, it costs you money on supplements that may or may not be addressing the actual problem, and most importantly, it costs you the months and years where this bacterial pathway is compounding, quietly degrading your cognitive performance while you research one more podcast or try one more elimination diet. Stanford proved the mechanism exists. The question is not whether this is happening in the human body. The question is whether it's happening in your body. And if so, how advanced is it? Which bacteria? How much inflammation? How compromised is the signaling? Those are not questions you can answer with a Google search. Those are questions that require data. So here's where we are. Stanford has given us the proof at a cellular level that gut bacteria directly impair cognitive function through the vagus nerve. This is not a theory anymore. It's published in Nature. It's measurable and it's reversible. Stanford demonstrated that restoring vagal signaling restored cognitive performance. The next question is simple. What's happening inside your gut right now? The Root Reveal Gut Panel was designed exactly for this moment. It's 104 different markers: bacterial balance, inflammation markers, digestive function, nutrient absorption, the comprehensive data you need to see whether the mechanism Stanford identified is active in your body. This is not a $99 mail-in test interpreted by an algorithm. Clinical grade testing with an option review one-on-one with me, where we map your findings to your symptoms and build a clear path forward. If you're further along, if you've already done research, or if you already know your gut is the issue and you're ready for a full, complete wellness evaluation, we can talk about that too. You simply book a discovery call. The link is down in the description. But for most of you watching this, the Root Reveal Gut Panel is the right starting point. It's where you stop guessing and you start seeing. Because here's what I know after working with thousands of high-performing professionals. The people who get results are not the ones who research the longest. They're the ones who decide that understanding the concept is not enough, that they need their own data, their own map, and their own numbers. And they act on that decision before the compounding cost takes something they can't get back. You are not broken, you are not undiagnosed. And if Stanford can restore cognitive function in aging mice by fixing the gut-brain communication line, imagine what becomes possible when you finally have the data to understand what's happening inside your own body. The link to the Root Reveal Gut Panel is in the description. The most logical step you can take this year is just below. Get the data, let's find out what they missed, and I'll see you in the next one.